things which were, intriguing when you were talking about this, specifically when you said, the different generations. And you mentioned some of these companies also who have now started using design thinking and whatever else to manage the workforce. Can you give some examples? You briefly mentioned, bringing them on board in the organization and then managing them while they're within the company. So any 2 or 3 interesting things that stand out to you that some, teams, leaders have done? That'll be very insightful to hear.
Yeah. So for example, in Tech Mahindra, they, through the design thinking and employee experience study, they found that many people were hesitating to go and speak to HR on certain subjects, and because sometimes they were not getting timely information or the right information. For example, on an innocuous subject like what is my leave entitlement when I'm sick?
Right.
Just as a thing, I mean, there is a rule laid down, but what if my sickness is much more, and what will the company do, etc. So they have figured out, they have designed a humanoid, an actual humanoid who is there in their workplace.
Right.
And that person can answer all the questions of employees. And they are now going to put humanoids in many workplaces because the humanoid has no biases. That person gives the straight answer, does not hold back information, does not use knowledge as power. And so the HR people who tended to control information and their own interpretation of the rules to suit the context, that was out. So they decided to eliminate that. All these so-called operations roles of HR, they can be easily done by machines. And to give that, therefore, they even gave that humanoid a character. It's a very interesting looking character, humanoid. So I went and saw the humanoid. And, and you can talk to the person. So this is just one experiment to say how biases, which help, and many times HR gets a bad name because they don't give the right kind of information to employees. They decided to just change this. This is just one experiment I'm telling you in Tech Mahindra. Let me give you another example. You see, people were finding that there is a lot of bias in the recruiting and selection process. Because the people who are interviewing people, the research was showing that actually people who are being rejected, at least on paper, they sometimes look better than the people being selected. Right? So they were just curious to know. And this company name I will not take because, it's, I think Sanjay knows that company, but I don't want to name them without their permission. It's one of the biggest banks of India, private sector bank. There the HR head started this experiment. He challenged his business leaders. He said, we will select 100 people based on your interviews, and I will select 100 people based on tests done through machines, which have no biases. And the tests are being well designed. Okay? And we will watch their careers over the next 2 years. So this experiment he did a few years back. And he was able to prove to all his business leaders that the ones selected through the tests had much better performance than the ones who were selected by the senior leaders through interviews. So he was able to prove to people that most people don't know how to interview. They don't have the right interpretation of the results. And that it takes really a master interviewer to really have the skill and have no ego and no bias to look at that. So here was another experiment done at the time of hiring, which completely transformed. In that company now, they got rid of the so-called number of rounds of interviews. And since they're using a lot of technology to screen people and to get them in. Yes.
Well, that's lovely to hear, because we keep reading a lot online where, it says the algos have bias and, because of the data being fed in and stuff like that. This actually is a subject worth publishing in some by itself, saying that, the bias comes from humans, right? But that's what we are feeding in.
That's right.
But it is possible to, in some ways, parameterize who would make a good employee in.
That's right. There is also research companies did that the way they were writing about their own company in their employee value proposition, even at the time of announcing a new opening on LinkedIn or a job portal like that, the language they were using, some language was having some kind of response, some language was not having the right kind of response.
Right.
And they figured out that, the target audience that you had in mind, which we were responding to a certain kind of language. Now, of course, there is science behind this. There is a Silicon Valley company who has actually, there's the app available where you can actually put your job description and the way you describe your company through the app, and it will tell you the scores on whether this will appeal to the so-called target audience that you have defined, because they have this global database of research. And it will then guide you and nudge you on what is the language you will write. So don't use hackneyed terms like we are an employee-centered company. The moment you write that, many people don't apply because they find it too much hackneyed and too much of a cliche. Yeah. So there is technology is being used a lot to educate you also how to describe yourself in a refreshing way, rather than use some borrowed phrases. Future ready managers. You see, a lot of people use phrases like that, which are overused. And they know it's borrowed from something you have read and it's not who you are as a company. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
things like that. Yeah.
And this is the same. Do you have examples of employees with in their journey through the organization also, how this technology is now rewiring the firm within?
Yeah, I can tell you the example of Airtel, because Airtel with Gopal Vittal and his team, we have done a fair bit of work, and this is known in public knowledge. Therefore, I'm talking about Airtel. Airtel has this, company that works with them, which is founded by a young guy who was in his early 20s. I think he has probably studied also in Stanford. I'm not able to remember his background now. But he has this, so everywhere you go to Airtel offices, you will say there are posters put there and stuff which also comes on their laptop with messages that talk to this person. That person is your digital sort of employee happiness coach.
Correct.
Now that person, you can ask any question, and instead of doing employee surveys like once in 6 months or once in a year, they have continuous measurement of employee health and employee well-being through this AI-driven platform that this youngster and his company have developed. And you can engage with that digital sort of person who's given, by the way, it's a female, and she's been given a name by the company. And anytime you can talk to her and then engage with her, and then she follows you through the journey. So what did you not like about the new rewards plan that was introduced? Because you seem to be upset. You have written there that you are only 2 out of 5 in your employee survey. So
right.
can you tell me more about that? And she engages in a conversation. And when people engage in a conversation after doing the survey, the company is learning a lot more about what's going on rather than simply the earlier employee survey. So here is another example.